evening, everyone. I have a very spicy topic for you guys this evening. I have a lot of, so full disclosure, I have not fully clarified my own stance on this yet. So you guys are going to get to walk through it with me firsthand. And you can learn a little bit about how I form my opinions. I will say right offhand that none of my opinions are based on nothing. I always have a reason for the things that I believe. And this one is a little bit tricky, so you guys are more than welcome to tell me what you think. I'm pretty sure I already know what a majority of you guys are going to say. This is about anonymous accounts on Twitter, specifically. Although not necessarily just Twitter, it's probably all social media. And this is a tweet from Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you guys saw this. He came under some pretty heavy fire for it, and it was a really interesting to see everybody kind of dunk on him, including people that I like and respect, and I think that they're wrong with most of their disagreement with him. And I say this because Jordan Peterson never says anything without thoroughly thinking through it first. And he will be the first to admit that he can be a little bit sensitive and maybe a little bit emotional. But this is a stance he's had for quite a while, and I have reason to believe that he did not come by it falsely. And I think we should break it down into two different ways of thinking about it, because I suspect Jordan Peterson is speaking to a very specific kind of troll, to a very specific kind of privacy, and he calls them kind of sneaky people who really want to have this extra layer of anonymity to say all kinds of horrible things. And before we start, I will say that Jordan Peterson has come under a lot of unwarranted attacks from a lot of terrible, terrible people, and most of them, I'm sure, are entirely anonymous, especially on Twitter. So we will go into that with that in mind, and keeping in mind that he is a relatively sensitive person. Like, when they asked him if he made a difference in the lives of young men, he choked up because it was very meaningful to him to think that he was making a difference in people's lives. So bearing that in mind, let's read what he has to say. Hopefully this works out. I didn't check this before I pull this up. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so I did a whole tweet thread about this, and you guys are welcome to agree or disagree with me on this count. I expect a lot of pushback, and as I said, I'm still developing some of my thoughts on this, so I could be a little bit off. I think it will be refined as I go on. That's typically what happens. I have typically a relatively strong initial reaction to something, and then over time I figure out why exactly I thought the way I thought. And I find out more about why I initially, because I do trust my intuition. Call me crazy. My intuition is typically a very good meter of what's true or false and right or wrong. Thus far in my life, it's been very consistently correct, and I am not afraid to follow it again, even as I have not fully yet fleshed out this idea. So follow me here on this one. Okay, so I have a little spicy take in response. Jordan Peterson said, "Don't allow the anonymous troll demons to post with the real verified people, Elon Musk. Put them in their own hell along with others like them. LOL, LOLs, bro, bruh, hyper users are narcissistic, Machiavellian, psychopathic, and sadistic." That's a pretty big allegation, but he does have an article attached to it, and we're going to look at it. Don't worry. But here's my take right offhand, because he was getting totally just blasted in the comments, and I think it's wrong of people to do that. Giving Jordan a hard time over this belies a basic lack of empathy for a man who has done nothing but very publicly attempt to make the world a better place and has gotten a lot of abuse in return. I don't think you can disagree with that. I think it would be empathetic to say, oh, why does he think this about anonymous accounts? And then ask further questions. I think that is the more empathic thing to do instead of just smearing him. I saw somebody call this a very elitist take. I don't think that's correct at all. Dr. Peterson is highly sensitive, something he freely acknowledges. I cannot help but imagine that the endless vitriol directed at him on a daily basis would wear away his willingness to engage with random people, many of whom I'm sure mean well. It is in no way surprising that he wants accountability. I do not blame him. Do you? Be honest. If Matt Walsh's enemies threatened him with their real names attached to their bios, there could be accountability. As it is, there never will be, and Matt has 6 kids, including 2 who are not yet born. Endless doxing and harassment has to wear someone down. It cannot be nice to be berated on a regular basis, even though you've done nothing wrong. I think Scott Adams says, that is Scott Adams, His idea of a ranked response system would work best. You should be able to toggle on a verified account option for responses to your tweets so that anyone anonymous is out of sight, out of mind. It takes a great deal of bravery to speak up when your name is attached to your words, and this is something I will not back down on. It takes a great deal of bravery to speak up when your name is attached to your words. If you're unwilling to stand up for what's right with your name attached to your stances in a school board meeting or in a social media environment, I firmly suggest you sit down instead of sniping at Dr. Peterson. His goal is cultural cohesion. He doesn't have much to do with anonymous sources, a perfectly valid reason to stay private. I will concede that anonymous sources are a very important use of anonymity, but that's not, again, we need to separate this out because that is exactly the opposite of what Jordan Peterson is talking about. He's not dealing with anonymous sources. He's not Julian Assange getting people to come through him on Twitter. This is just him being very, very frustrated by people who make his life on Twitter and probably on all social media platforms a living nightmare. And I can't blame him. I really can't. And I don't think anybody can. His goal is cultural cohesion. He doesn't have much to do with anonymous sources, right? A perfectly valid reason to stay private. I cannot say I blame him. Go ahead and lecture me from private accounts. I am fully public. You have my full name for better or worse, and I've never tried to pretend I'm not myself. I attach my face and my name to my beliefs because they're worth defending and I am not ashamed of them. So this is something we used to talk about a lot on Timcast IRL. And Tim would kind of get a little inflexible about this because he said, and I agree for the most part, although I understand it's kind of tricky when you have kids, you've got a family to look after, like Matt Walsh does, for example. It is very cowardly to say, I will not speak up for my beliefs because if I do, I will lose my job, for example. And I know that's a hard thing to say. And I'm sure some people would say that's a very privileged thing to say. Perhaps the better approach would be to try to get a job that is not going to fire you for holding the views that you hold. I think that's a good prerequisite before you get into any kind of job searching at all. I think that's a good policy to have on hand. I do think that attaching your name and your face to your account does require more courage than simply saying, I'm going to be an anonymous account. I'm going to just hide out in my burner. No one needs to know. I don't want to catch heat for what I believe. But then I really want you to consider whether or not you are in the correct position because I want you to ask yourself why your anonymity is as important as it is. And I won't say that you don't deserve anonymity. I just want everybody to ask themselves that question. What is the point of being anonymous? I think that's a fully fair question to ask because lots of people will say it's because they don't want to come under fire for being conservative. That's understandable. I totally get it. But then I also want you guys to think about what it would be like for you to stand up in a parent-teacher meeting and say, my kid should not be influenced by these horrible, malign ideas, should not be subject to these awful identities and all this nonsense that everybody is throwing at young kids these days, because we know this is happening. And I just have to wonder if it's possible if we would all get a little braver if we were to attach our real names and our real faces to our Twitter accounts. And you guys are welcome to disagree with me, as I said before. This is just my stance. And I do like, personally, the idea of accountability, especially for people who are, for example, coming after libs of TikTok and Matt Walsh. You have to ask whether people would be a little less insufferable on social media if their names and faces were attached to their accounts. I do think that's a question worth asking for sure. But what I really wanted to say here was that there are two different levels of anonymity that we need to take into account. So as I mentioned earlier, Jordan Peterson is going for cultural cohesion. But at the same time, I respect that we have a right, as much as is possible to have this right, to some form of anonymity when we go online. Now, whether we are entitled to that privacy on Twitter, I don't know. No idea. You could ask Elon Musk. I'm sure he'd have strong feelings about it. Or not. Maybe not. This doesn't seem to be something he's really kicked around a lot. But I think that if you go onto a social media platform with the understanding that you will have the cloak of privacy, you should be very careful, because I've kind of seen this happen with Slack a little bit. Slack is fully visible to your employers, 100%, and you have to go into it with the understanding that every single thing you say on there is going to be read by your boss whenever they're feeling a little bored or whatever. And I think that people tend to lose sight of that, and I think that that's actually a weakness of social media. I think it was Mike Tyson who said that social media has made it very common for people to say exactly what they think without fear of having an actual physical response to what they say. So they insult people, they slander people, they lie about them, they call them names, they abuse them terribly. And I suspect that's a little bit of Jordan Peterson's emotional reaction to this. And I do understand. I totally do. So let's look at this article that he brought up. This is entitled Social Media Use and Personality, Beyond Self-Reports and Trait Level Assessments. Okay, that's an annoying title. Let's read the abstract. Let's see what we get out of it. We investigated how objective behavioral data on social media use was correlated with the dark tetrad facets and the hexaco traits. Okay, so I pulled up the dark tetrad personality traits. In psychology, the dark tetrad refers to a group of 4 personality traits. They're Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, together known as the dark triad, plus sadism. They are called dark because of their, quote, evil qualities, extreme selfishness, and taking advantage of others without empathy. The dark tetrad are also referred to as risk-taking behaviors. That's very interesting. All right, I'm going to close that one. We don't need that anymore. And then the other thing they mentioned was hexaco traits, which I believe is similar to the big 5 personality traits. So that's like, let's see here, honesty, humility, openness, emotionality, personality, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, I get it, I see. And it's different than the big 5, but Jordan Peterson knows exactly what he's talking about by bringing it up. So let's continue to read this. We tracked usage time and usage session of social media users, considering Instagram to be a visual social media compared to Facebook, and therefore to be related to, quote, dark personality characteristics, i.e. short-term mating, antisocial attitudes. Additional to bivariate correlations, we controlled the dark tetrad facets for the hexaco model and vice versa using partial correlations, and found that agentic extroversion, self-centered antagonism, and Machiavellian tactics, but not the hexaco traits, were correlated with Instagram usage time and sessions. So they're seeing these negative traits instead of these more positive traits with Instagram users specifically. It's just very interesting. We observed no personality correlation with Facebook use. In women, more facets were associated with Instagram use, while in men, only boldness was linked to it. We discussed the findings in light of short-term mating and antisocial behavior on social media, e.g. niche specialization, cyberstalking. Disentangling the dark tetrad traits helped to refine previous findings. Okay, I'm going to take issue with this study, because much as I trust Jordan Peterson and respect his field of expertise, he's a very brilliant man. He has a lot of experience in psychology and counseling and whatnot. I don't think that this study says exactly what he thought it would. So he used this in the context of trying to make the case against, for example, anonymity on Twitter. And I think that he chose the wrong study. I just think it doesn't have anything to do with what the case he's trying to make. But I digress. I think that this comes down to his attempt to maintain some kind of cultural cohesion. As you guys know, this is one of my biggest purposes on this platform too. This is why I do what I do. This is why I try to convey my thoughts to you guys on a daily basis, because I think it's so important. And I think the only way to make this kind of positive social change is to speak for ourselves and to make our voices heard and to not be afraid of the consequences. And I'm very lucky to be in a situation in my life where I can do that. But I will say at the same time, never have I ever been afraid to state my views on the internet, because I'm not ashamed of my views. I don't hold white nationalist views. I know I'm not a Nazi. I know the truth about myself. And I am 100% confident that if someone were to show my tweets to my employer, it would not cause a problem for me, because I would not work for anyone crazy enough to believe that I was a Nazi. And I would not believe that anyone who would hire me would think I was a Nazi either. So I would really need to hear a compelling case that I'm going to get fired for my views on Twitter just for being a conservative. And I would need to see examples of this happening to believe that anonymity is more important than putting a face to your beliefs and making sure that they're heard. But I digress on that point. Like I said in my thread, I think that Scott Adams is really onto something with the idea of sorting by whether someone is verified. And I think that's probably the best way to make this happen. So Scott was talking the other day about how there would be levels of respondents. So at the top, you have everyone whose identity has been verified. I think he said blue checks. I don't recall. I'm not a blue check, so I can't really speak to that for sure. But I do know that when you have a blue check, you are your identity should be fully verified. And I think that you have to submit a copy of your ID or something, because they're really trying to make sure you are who you say you are. I think that this would help prevent a lot of the bullying and harassment that I'm sure Jordan Peterson faces. But to be fair, it's not just on Twitter. It's not just on, social media platforms. This is very much a real world issue that Jordan Peterson, unfortunately, it very much is his cross to bear. And I know it's hard, and I know it's really, really tough for someone who's just trying to do the right thing and who's such a soft-hearted person, I can tell. And I know that this makes his life probably much worse than any of us realize. He probably actually loses a lot of sleep over this, which I'm incredibly empathetic, because that's no joke, and he's very high in some of these negative traits that make him anxious and make him kind of worried about the future. And I think that it's hard because there's no way to escape the kind of criticism that comes your way when you're just trying to do something right. I think that you have to fortify your own personal philosophy of why you're doing what you're doing so that you are able to defend against, one of the things that I used to tell myself when I would get into it with strangers online was that I know the truth about myself and they don't know anything about me. And that would really help, because I was like, well, they're calling me all kinds of horrible names. They're accusing me of terrible things. They're calling me fat. They're calling me ugly, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you know what? This kind of thing can't affect me. It can't, because I think that what I'm doing is more important than my hurt feelings. I think that what I have to say is more meaningful than any kind of critique someone who doesn't know me at all can levy against me. And I'm not a perfect person. I'm a very strongly opinionated person. I'm not afraid. I don't believe in pulling punches. I like the idea of getting my point across clearly and cleanly and with little room for misunderstanding. I think that's a very important trait. And this is actually what I'm doing right now, is practicing being able to do that, trying to put it very succinctly and get it across completely, thoroughly, with, room for questions if necessary, but with as much clarity as possible. And I don't see a solution. I don't see the solution that Jordan Peterson wants ever happening. I think that anonymity is something that we are just going to have to learn to work with and deal with. I understand that he feels beset particularly by these trolls, because he probably feels especially that what he's doing is so important and so meaningful to humanity. And I agree that it is. I genuinely do think that what he's doing is positive. I don't think that Elon Musk is going to be able to solve his problem for him, unfortunately. And I understand that we do have this right to privacy that people sometimes misuse. The fact of the matter is that sometimes people misuse this freedom, this privilege, this right, whatever you would call this. And Andy is correct, because he and I were talking about this before the show. He was talking about how we have to have some right to anonymity. That's a basic right that people need to be able to rely on the internet. I think that's fair, but I also understand where Jordan's coming from. You guys let me know what you think, for sure. This is a very interesting topic. This is something Jordan's brought up a couple different times that I think absolutely deserves a good looking at. I see a lot of dismissal in the comments, and I really don't like that. I think that's cheap. I think it's lazy. I appreciate Zuby because he gave a more thoroughly thought out response to it, and that was good. Ian Miles Chong says, I'm not a fan of anons who use their anonymity to troll, but we all have the option to limit our interactions to people we follow. I rarely use it, but it's there. That's correct. That's for sure true. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, does someone who does not want to put their name behind their ideas have a right or a privilege to use this kind of platform? And that's just the kind of question that Elon Musk is probably going to have to wrestle with down the line, because there is definitely a bullying and harassment and threats, like Matt Walsh was just tweeting about earlier today. Like, he's come under serious fire for his refusal to kowtow to, left-leaning trans agendas, and he's just not backing down on it. And his name and his face are attached to all of his views. And those are some of the single most dangerous opinions that you can hold. These people will come to your house. They will not mess around. And Matt's prepared, more power to him. But social media is being used by anonymous accounts to make actual physical threats to his person and to his family. And I personally have a big problem with that. I don't like that at all. And I know it's against Twitter's terms of service, but they need to do a better job of enforcing this moving forward for sure. And that's something that I hope Elon Musk will move to do down the road, but we'll see. And Zuby says, okay, let's see what Zuby has to say. Zuby's a very wise gentleman. With respect, this is a bad idea. I encourage people to not be anonymous online for a host of reasons, accountability being one. But wouldn't want that mandatory in order to participate in an online conversation. That's fair. This random person says, bro, you just got out of jail 2 minutes ago. Who defines hate here? Those who you would least want to define it. Don't regulate it because you can't. Those are your words. Okay, all proven to be a lie. Agree to disagree. I think that Aurelian has a point here. If you're going to give someone the power to define what makes something hateful, you're going to have a problem. But I suspect the benefit of the doubt is not being given here. And I would suspect that Jordan Peterson is simply referring to the terms of service stuff where people are making threats against him, probably. Although I will say I don't know 100% for sure. All right, people smack talking him. Just turn off the replies if you can't handle the heat, brother. I don't know if that's right. I'm going to have to disagree with you here, good doctor. The problem is that every time someone has to make a determination on what is right and wrong, that person is subject to an arbitrary view of it. This is the problem under old management, just old and had too much power. That's Malcolm Flex, whom we love. We know him. We appreciate him over there. Anyway, lots of Jordan Peterson dunking that I don't think is fully warranted. I think there is a question here that he's raising that needs to be answered. And I think people's response to this is so strong and so knee-jerk because they haven't thought through it like he probably has. I'm willing to bet that Jordan Peterson has considered this much more thoroughly than anyone who's immediately knocking him in the comments. I think that's fair to say. Let me see what you guys are thinking, though. This is kind of an interesting conversation. I know it's a little bit contentious. Not everyone's going to agree with me, and that's okay. Hey, Lids. Hey, hello. Today's episode sponsored by Reebok. Correct. Yes, that's what I have on my shoulder. This is my little gym shirt. You are reading your own tweet. That is correct. I made a whole thread about it, and I made it for the purpose of this video so that I could read it with you guys. And I'm using Jordan Peterson's tweet to launch off of because I thought this was such an interesting conversation that I think we definitely need to have. Fully agree with you, Lids. Yeah, I don't know if you fully do because there's a lot of nuance there, and I'm not convinced that anyone agrees with me fully, and that's fine. I can report from California, exclusive insanity coverage. California is a very crazy place, beautiful but insane. Notice how I am living by example, and I totally understand the perspective. I was there once. Sooner or later, you will have to face yourself in the mirror and decide. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you. And I assume Kevin here is speaking about choosing to not be anonymous. I think it's a very brave choice to make, and I think it's something that we should respect and appreciate when people do it. Maybe the key is to just respect the people who do and to culturally enforce the choice to not be anonymous and to attach your name to your beliefs. Because if you believe that your beliefs are more important than you are as an individual, then you're going to be, brave enough to put your face behind it and your name behind it. And I think that's fair. It's just a different degree of bravery than most people have. AP for Liberty. Yay, Austin. I'm just here to support Sour Patch Lids. And then he's dabbing. Yikes. Thanks, Austin. I appreciate that. I like the new emojis. Great new emojis. Agreed. People who make fun of your looks are fools. Look, being made fun of for how you look on the internet is par for the course. It's okay. It's not a big deal. But what I learned from that was the concept of I know myself. I know my own worth. I don't need a stranger's opinion on the internet to tell me if I'm good looking. It doesn't matter to me. I don't really care what they think. And I think that's a right opinion to have of people on the internet because you want to care what people think. If you're trying to engage the culture, you need to care about what people think, but not too much. So you need to like right now, I'm reading your comments. I think it's great. I love interacting with you guys. I think it's really fun. But at the same time, I don't know you guys personally. So if you have like a an opinion of me that's based off of like, oh, I don't know, I don't like the way you look or whatever, instead of like a nuanced, hey, I think you're wrong about this, I'm going to take one a lot less seriously than I take the other. And I think that's probably a good way to think of it. The internet is such a new phenomenon that I think we really need a different plan of attack on how to deal with it. I think it's really making people kind of depressed and lonely, and I think people aren't looking at it right. I tend to think that people look at much of life wrong. I think they look at marriage wrong. The old ball and chain, I think they look at, having kids wrong. Oh, you'll never have fun again. I think they look at growing old wrong, all of this stuff. And it's like, they look at it in the most negative way possible. And I just don't see the benefit to that, because these are some of the things that you're going to be dealing with your whole life. If you're lucky, you'll have a chance to be a parent. If you're lucky, you'll have a chance to get married. If you're lucky, you'll find a great person because you've worked hard to make your own self great. And I think that people tend to look at everything backwards. They look at everything very dark, very negative. And it's kind of sad to me, but I digress. I think that the anonymity for people on the right, I kind of understand. From people on the left, I feel like for far crazy leftists that it's very much a tool to attack. It's a tool to dox. It's a tool to try to threaten people without being held accountable. And I have great exception to that. So on the one side, we have like a version of what can seem almost cowardly. And on the other side, we have actual malice. And I don't think either one of those things are positive. I understand the necessity of anonymity, but it makes it very challenging when it's being used for weakness on one side and for actual evil on the other. It's very easy to understand Jordan Peterson's perspective when you look at it that way. That's how I see it in any case. But it looks like Andy's been commenting a lot in the chat, so let's see what he's thinking. Musk got the job and wants to change a lot of things. You have to give it time to see what will become of these changes. 100%. Yeah, he's bringing a lot of people back, which is awesome. I think that's great. Twitter's not the end of the world. It's not the most important thing in the world, but it is definitely the platform where people should have free speech. I think that's fair. And I think that's what Elon's going for. Good for him. Andy is here. Thought he was away today. He's not. He's right nearby. Anonymity, he says, plays a crucial role in protecting us from tyranny. That's fair. He says, okay, so K8991 Gaming, responding to Andy, says exactly, anonymity literally allows me to share my thoughts. It's always almost impossible otherwise. Why? Why is it impossible? I worked in a hospital for the first 10 years of my career. Let's say the second 5 years. So the first 5 years of my career, I worked in nursing homes and rehab centers and travel nursing. And then I worked in a hospital. And at no point did I ever think, wow, I should not share this spicy political meme, because what if the hospital I work for finds out? First of all, I was, employee like 679 out of 4,050 who worked at this one facility. So I didn't feel particularly singled out. It was a Catholic hospital, so I had that going for me, but I always worked more than 2 jobs. I worked home health, I worked at the rehab center, and then I worked at the hospital too. And at no point did I ever think, wow, I should not post this because people I work with might find me out. And they might discover that I am, a kind of centrist conservative. I never saw the issue with, I understand if you have spicy views, you should be able to share them anonymously. I don't think your speech should be restricted because of that, but I also wonder if we are perhaps placing too much concern on, for example, getting fired. And like Tim said constantly, he's like, if this is not something worth getting fired over, why do you believe it? Like, why is it so important to you? This is not something that you're willing to take a stand on. But I digress. Anyway, Andy is, of course, correct. It does play a role in protecting us from tyranny, a la I am Spartacus. If we lose the ability to be anonymous online, we'll inevitably spiral onto a totalitarian hellscape that'll be very difficult to ever crawl back out of. Okay, so this is, again, Andy. And like I was saying to him before we started this evening, I can't help feeling that's a little bit hyperbolic. I could be wrong, and it's best to ride every scenario out to its fullest extent. But at the same time, we don't know what would happen if we were to lessen the restrictions or if we were to increase restrictions for getting a Twitter account or something like that. You don't have to be on Twitter. I know it's really unpopular to say that. But at the same time, if you want the privilege of being in the public square, I think that it is fair to have qualifications, like you need to show maybe your face, maybe your actual name, one of those 2 different things. And I think that Like I said, I'm still developing this thought, and Andy's obviously been thinking about this a lot longer than I have, but I digress. Let's read what else we have to say. Is the internet really new? A whole generation of people grew up with it already. I'm referring to the sum total of human evolution. The internet is very new. So if we're at midnight, the internet came on at like 11:59:59. Like literally as close to where we are now as humanly possible. And I think that this is something that we've never had before. Like we're literally seeing how it changes people's posture, how they have phone posture or whatever. We're seeing how it changes. Like I was seeing something about how suicidality for 5 to like 12-year-olds had quadrupled or tripled over the past few years. And we hear about the knockout game. We hear about all these awful trends, especially coming out of TikTok, especially coming out of China. We know this is the case. And the fact of the matter is that people don't fully understand how to handle the internet yet. I remember when I was 15 and I got my first phone. It was a little Nokia. I think it was a little Nokia brick, one of those unbreakable ones. And you had to type 800 times to get one letter in your text message. It was great. It was funny. But I can remember that. That was 16 years ago. And today we have the internet in our phones, in our pockets 24/7. We lose sleep over it. The blue light gets into our brains and messes with it just screws with us in a whole host of different ways that we don't take very seriously or don't fully understand. And I think that's really something that we need to think about moving forward. But I digress on that part. Let's see here. In my opinion, since Jordan Peterson's lack of experience on the internet is probably pretty profound, I would say the questions about anonymity, he's probably considered less than most. I don't know if that's fair to say because he has been exposed to anonymous trolls much, 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 much more than you or I. He has that GQ interview where, he has the Kathy Newman interview. He has an insane level of fame that I don't think he fully expected, but it was because he chose to take a stand. He attached his face to it. He attached his name to it, and he decided to follow through on it and see where it got him. And it got him a bunch of people who don't have to take any stake in the process, who can just sit on the sidelines behind their little anime profile and poke fun at him. And he doesn't think that's very fair. And honestly, I can't really blame him. Now, whether we should do away with anonymity altogether because of that, I don't think at all, even close to anything like that, but I think that he has a point that most of us have never fully understood. New California will exclude Los Angeles, Sacramento, and San Francisco. We can only hope. Presenting your views with your real name behind it is a very important kind of speech that plays an important role, but anonymous speech must always be protected, and that's fair too. I think that's totally fair. I just understand Jordan Peterson's perspective too entirely, I have a few people who just follow me around and hate on me, and I'm like, what are you doing? I have no idea who you are, anything about you, but you're just sniping at me constantly and you're behind this nice little profile picture. I have no way of knowing anything about you. Are you a real person? Are you a bot? I mean, I don't really care at the end of the day because, like I said, their opinion doesn't ultimately matter too much to me. But I suspect that Jordan Peterson's a lot more sensitive than I am. Like, it takes a lot to make me tear up. And all it took to make Jordan Peterson tear up was the mention that he might make a significant difference in the lives of disaffected young people. And I think that's very sweet and touching. And I think that's something that we should empathize with before we give him a hard time for this view. And I completely understand where he's coming from. Somebody says no. Okay. Strong take. All right. Well, this is a good kind of back and forth in the comments. I think that's fair. You do not have the right to my real name. Sure, I don't, but you also don't have a right to be on Twitter, do you? I think that's fair. I think it's fair to ask the question of whether you have a right to be on social media if you're going to choose to be anonymous. I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying it's a question and a conversation that we should probably have. Because given all the bots that Elon found on Twitter and all of the spam, the harassment, the threats that people like Matt Walsh get just for standing by their own beliefs and putting their own names by them, that requires a level of bravery that anonymous accounts I don't think will ever have any hope of comparing with. I also don't think they'll make as much a difference as people like Matt Walsh will, but they'll also receive absolutely no pushback like Jordan and Matt Walsh do. And I think that's just the bottom line. Sure, I don't have a right to your first or full name. I mean, it's just kind of a circular argument because we assume that we have a right to do stuff like get on Twitter and be anonymous, and I'm not convinced. And I will need to think on this more. I freely admit up front that this is an as yet undeveloped idea. And I feel like I've kind of beaten this dead horse to a pulp. Thank you guys all so much for coming and for engaging in the conversation. I appreciate it. I think that there's a lot of defensiveness when you get into anonymity because people all have their reasons for being anonymous, and I completely understand. I think that having a burner account just to see who blocks you, I think that's fully fair game as long as you're not using it to snipe at people. I think that Jordan Peterson felt perhaps triggered in a way that he shouldn't have, but I respect his right. I respect his point of view, just as I respect all y'all's right to be private too. I think that's fine. I just wish that maybe the issue is that I wish more people would put their name behind their views and were brave enough to stand up and say, this is me, this is my view, this is my first name. I'm not sorry. My views aren't crazy. They're not far outside of the mainstream. I have no issue with anything I say being taken to, for example, my boss. I'm more than happy to explain it to anyone. I think that takes a special kind of commitment and courage. And honestly, I really, really respect. I suspected this was the case before he mentioned it on his show the other day, but I was like, Matt Walsh must come under really, really heavy threats, like bad. And he's been talking about it more lately. And it's like, yeah, wow, he has young kids. He has a whole family relying on him, and he is just being relentlessly targeted. But Matt Walsh isn't saying that people don't deserve anonymity. He's just drawing light to these threats, and I think that that is perhaps the right balance. So, along with Scott Adams' idea of separating verified people from unverified people, I think that's a great start. I think that will prevent a lot of the harassment and bullying that Jordan Peterson is probably getting. And along with Matt Walsh kind of highlighting this and reporting this stuff and bringing it to, like Elon Musk's attention, I think will help solve some of these problems without getting rid of anonymity. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to get rid of anonymity. I just know that it takes a great deal more bravery. It's hard. And it's hard to put into words because I don't hate anyone for being anonymous. I completely understand. But at the same time, it's hard to be the person. It's hard to be the man in the arena and to just sit there and be berated by and made fun of by and mocked and abused, harassed, doxxed, and bullied by people who won't even attach their faces to their names. I completely understand Jordan Peterson's point of view. But I digress. I'll wrap it up here. You guys let me know what you think. Go over to my Twitter and yell at me there if you have an anonymous account. Because my last tweet I didn't read, but I was like, you guys can go ahead and, yell at me from your, private accounts, whatever. I understand. You have the right to say what you think. But accountability is also 100% necessary. And I think that's all that Jordan Peterson was getting at. And for that reason, he's not canceled. I fully recommend that we all exercise our empathy and try to understand where he's coming from. And as I said earlier, I will wrap it here. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Until next time, bye guys.